Are you looking to improve your uphill running ability? Well, stick around and I'll take you through the 4 techniques that I have found that help me love uphill running. It's raining. Looks like we're doing this one in the rain. My name is Scott Miller and this is Trail Ambitions, where I like to talk about things that may be interesting to trail runners. In this episode, I'll share with you the 4 techniques that I use when trail running in the mountains. I'll talk about how they can be beneficial and when I like to use them. Oh, and at the end, I'll share how the first one got its name. Before we get started, I just want to mention that I believe running is a state of mind. So although some of these may technically not be classified as running, on my trail runs, they're all running. Let's get started. Technique number 1 is baby steps. As you're running, you're shortening your stride. As if you're downshifting on a bike, you're going into a lower gear. So shorter strides gives you more torque. As you start to go uphill, shortening your stride will give you more power. You want to maintain an elevated but manageable heart rate, one that you could sustain for a while. Keeping a breathing rhythm of full breaths from the belly. Maintaining a mid-foot strike with a slight forward lean from the ankles. Especially as it gets steeper, you want to maintain that forward lean so you have good stability as you're going uphill or leaning into the hill. If you're doing this for a long time, you may also want to choose to oscillate your feet from one direction to the other. So almost sidestepping. I don't do it often, but if it's a sustained run for a very long time, your calves could get sore. And so by moving slightly to the side, running kind of sideways a little bit for a while, maybe every 30 seconds, kind of switch, not dramatically, just a little bit, it will shift from using that one muscle in the back of your calf to the side muscles a bit. Like if you've ever run a long distance on a road where you're, a hard surface where you're using that same muscle in your calf for the entire time, you're overusing that one muscle. So by running slightly slide step from side to side will allow you to take some of the pressure off of that one muscle and spread it out a little bit. So it's just short strides like that. So keeping the stride short, as opposed to a long stride, you just shorten the stride, which gives you the more power. But as you start to go up, shorten the stride, and you'll be able to, again, maintain your 90 beats per minute. So the same cadence, just shortening the stride will give you more power as you go uphill. Just as if you were riding a bike, you would downshift into a lower gear, but keep the high rotation as you go up. Same type of thing, but on running. Okay, so that's technique number 1, baby steps. Technique number 2 is march. So the march it's a hike in a sense, but it's keeping a very straight back, almost like a squat a little bit down, and you're elongating your stride. So the difference would be if you are running and then you go to a walk, a walk may be just a normal walk like this. A march is more deliberate. So you're basically marching like this. So what you're doing is you're extending your stride, maybe start with an inch or 2, but it could be 3 or 4 inches. And so what you're doing is extending your stride and you're not losing pace. You're actually hiking faster and intentional. So technique number 2 is this march, where you're basically keeping a straight back and then extending your stride and you're marching. So swinging the arms to get nice momentum is great. Sometimes you like to, sometimes you don't, that's okay. But you're elongating your stride and you're almost pulling yourself as opposed to pushing yourself. One of the key things with the march is to maintain an elevated heart rate. So when you are going uphill and you switch to a hike because either fatigued or it's just steeper than you can run, what I found is that if you let your heart rate go too low, maybe, because when you think I'm switching from a run to a hike, sometimes people will let their heart rate drop too low. And as a result, they get too relaxed. And then when they need to run again, it's hard to get going. If you just are hitting that fatigue, that point where you need to, you can't run it, you can't baby step it anymore, you need to switch to a hike, just drop your heart rate a little bit. So keep an elevated heart rate. And what that will do is it will keep you in that same running zone. You can still recover by just dropping it slightly. You don't have to go completely relaxed to recover after a strenuous part of the run. You can actually do an active recovery. So just drop your heart rate a little bit, but keep the march going. It may take you a little longer to recover, but you will be able to do it without losing a lot of speed and pace. So if you are in the middle of a race, you can still maintain a good pace by switching to the march. Another thing that you should also consider is as you start to go uphill is to try to keep your heels on the ground. And that's different from running, because if you're doing the baby step technique, you're up on your midfoot, so your heels are off the ground, just tapping a little bit as you midfoot strike and release. But as you switch to the hike, you no longer need to worry about that midfoot strike. You can actually land more flat-footed, and because you're hiking up a hill. And so as you get steeper, try to extend your heels to the ground. What that's going to do is it's going to force you to use more of your larger quad muscles, because you'll actually squat like a little bit like this. And so as you step, you'll squat a bit, and so you'll use more of these and more of a pulling technique as opposed to a pushing. If you keep your heels on the ground, it will completely change your gait than from up here from a running. So it's this to a that. And so you're using completely different muscles in your quads, hamstrings, in your calves, which will allow those muscles to rest. So as you are hiking, you're using a completely different gait. When you get to the top and now it flattens out and you want to start running again, or it starts going back downhill, you shift yourself up to your midfoot and you're using your running muscles. So in that case, you start using a fresh set of muscles because you're switching from one to the other. If you stay up on your toes or your midfoot while you're hiking and you start going out, you're using the same calf muscle each time. Okay, technique number 3 is the knee push. So with the knee push, you are leaning slightly forward. You're bent over and you're pushing on your knees, which gives you a little extra power because you're using your arms to push on your knees to kind of push yourself up the hill. I think there's a little bit of psychological change that happens there too, like you're giving yourself a break as things get steeper, or if you've just came off a very intense part of the run, whether you try to run part of the hill and you need to switch to a hike, using the knees will give you better performance. So let's say you just try to run part of the hill and now you've hit your limit and you need to switch to a hike, but you don't want to lose pace. Maybe you're in a race or you're just trying to keep up with people or just trying to push yourself. Using the knee push will allow you to use your arms to help push your legs up the remaining part of the hill or whatever segment that you're working on. I tend to use this technique when it gets very steep. So you are slightly going uphill, you're using your baby steps, then it gets a little steeper and you switch to your march. And then if it gets even steeper still, then maybe putting your hands on your knees and pushing yourself up will give you that little extra push. I prefer to use the knee push for short distances, primarily because when you are putting your hands on your knees, even if it's steep, you're compressing your chest area. So it will make it harder to breathe. So if you just had a heavy effort part of the run, this may feel good at first, but you're actually compressing your chest cavity and your stomach. So it will be harder to get the air in. I tend to use it just to get me through a particular part, and then I switch back to the march technique. Because the march is keeping my chest open, I can breathe more, get more oxygen in. It'll give me that endurance I need to carry me up the rest of the mountain. Technique number 4, the scramble. So the scramble is used in very specific situations when it gets so steep that you need to use hands as well as feet to get up the climb. So now we're looking at, beyond class 2. Now we're into class 3 type climbing almost, looking for handholds, more of a crab crawl if necessary. But if you're climbing a mountain, you're on scree, using all fours to have good contact with the ground, especially if there's a large exposure and risk of falling or loose rock. It's better to have more contacts with the ground, with the earth, more handholds and footholds to get yourself up that particular part. So the scramble technique is using your hands as well as your feet, typically necessary for extremely steep terrain. So steep rocks, scree, maybe tree and roots. If you're climbing up an embankment, let's say, using hands would be the technique I would use to get up that. So those are the 4 techniques. I typically switch between the baby steps and the march most often. Reserve the knee push and the scramble only when it's necessary. Those 2 techniques, the baby steps and the march, are very efficient. And by using them correctly, in the sense where you have, you're dropping down using more of a straight back, elongating in the march, and then when you switch back to the baby steps, you're kind of propping yourself up and running more midfoot. You're using very different gaits. So you can alternate back between those. Better practice you have at extending your stride. While you're going uphill, it's a toss-up which one you could use. So the one that I use is the one that propels me forward the fastest. I start with the baby steps. And so I'm running with very short steps. As it gets steeper and steeper, if I sense that because I've shortened my stride so much that my speed has now decreased to the point where if I switch to a march, I will actually increase my speed. It's at that point that I then switch to the march, elongate my stride, yet drop my heart rate just a little bit, and switch to a completely different set of muscles. It's a way to do active recovery on the climb. Also at that point, you may choose to take out, some food, eat some food, because I find I can eat food when I'm hiking better than I can when I'm running. I still do both, but that's another time where you may choose to switch to the march because you want to eat on the uphill, if it's not too steep, of course. Okay, the baby steps. How did that get its name? Well, it's actually from a Bill Murray movie from the early 90s called What About Bob? Bob was a guy who was basically afraid of everything, and he found a technique from the psychiatrist that was called baby steps. And so in his mind, everything became a baby step. He was afraid to touch things. He was afraid to do anything. So he would use baby steps. Baby step to turn the knob. Baby step to answer the phone. And so this is how I have it in my head. So it can be kind of a fun game where you just, baby stepping over this rock. Baby stepping through this creek. Baby stepping up this mountain. And so you just, it's more of almost a mantra. You just baby stepping and shorten the stride, and you can literally go up anything by baby stepping it. So that's the story behind why I call it baby steps, and that's the mantra I have in my head when I'm switching to the baby step to climb up a mountain. And it's a fun movie, so I'd recommend it. All right, when you're out on your next run, I would say seek out some runs that have some elevation, different terrains, maybe some steeper stuff, some less steep stuff, and cycle through these different techniques so you can easily transition from one to the other. And then, working on baby steps, and then transition into the march. Maybe you work on, doing the knee push, but notice how it will compress your chest cavity and make it a little harder to breathe, and how you don't want to do it for too long. So switch back to the march. If you have some place where you can use some scrambling, great, practice that as well. So that would be my recommendation, is on the next run, seek out some of these and cycle through some of these techniques. What uphill techniques do you like to use? Are there any variations to these techniques that you've developed? Please add your ideas, thoughts, feedback to the comments. If you like this content, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and helping me build this community. Okay, that's it for now. Let's go baby step up a mountain.